A bargain sealed in dust. The wind whistled low across the open plains, carrying the dry scent of mesquite and dust. Thomas Hale sat slouched on the porch of his weather-worn ranch house, boots planted firmly on the floorboards, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his brow. His land stretched endlessly before him, golden grasses, scattered cattle, a horizon of mountains painted purple by the fading sun. To any outsider, it was paradise. But to Thomas, it was slipping away. The bank notice lay folded in his pocket, heavy as a stone. Unless he remarried within a fortnight, the Hale ranch would no longer legally belong to him. His late wife, Clara, had been the one who secured the original claim. When she died 2 winters ago, her family challenged the deed. According to the county judge, his only chance to keep the land was to show he had a household fit and whole again. That meant a wife. That meant starting over, something he hadn't thought his heart was capable of. He lifted his head, staring into the sunset. Clara's laugh still echoed in the house's empty halls. Her cooking, her voice humming as she stitched, her soft hands brushing the dirt off his coat after long days on the range, all of it had left with her. Thomas had buried her on the hill by the cottonwoods, and with her, most of his joy. But grief didn't stop bills. Grief didn't stop neighbors with hungry eyes from circling like vultures, waiting for him to fail. Without a wife, without proof of a stable home, the land would be stripped from his name and handed back to Clara's brother, a man who never worked the soil a day in his life. Thomas's jaw tightened. Over his dead body. The town of Fair Bend was buzzing when Thomas rode in the next morning. His horse's hooves clopped against the packed dirt street as shopkeepers opened their shutters and children darted between wagons. But beneath the ordinary bustle ran a quieter undercurrent, whispers of the widow rancher who needed a wife, and fast. Folks tipped their hats or offered polite greetings, but their eyes slid past him too quickly. Everyone knew his predicament. Thomas stopped at the general store, tying off his horse before stepping inside. Mr. Larkin, the storekeeper, greeted him with too bright cheer. "Morning, Hale. Supplies today." "Same as usual," Thomas muttered. "Flour, beans, coffee." He hesitated, then added, "And news." Larkin's eyebrows arched. "News? Of women," Thomas said bluntly. "One's lookin' for a place. I hear tell the Stanton widow might be seeking." Larkin shifted uncomfortably, weighing his words. "Stanton widow's already spoken for, I'm afraid. Took up with that tanner out east." He leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "Truth is, Hale, ain't many single women left in these parts. Most are married off or gone west." Thomas's gut sank. There must be someone. "Well," Larkin glanced toward the back door. "There's the cook girl." Thomas frowned. "The cook girl? Name's Ellie. Works down at the boarding-house kitchen. Some say she was sold along with the place when old Mrs. Green took her in. Folks call her property more than person." Larkin's mouth twisted as if the words tasted bitter. "She ain't got family, far as anyone knows." Thomas stiffened. A girl branded as property. Desperate times or not, could he stomach marrying someone treated like a possession? Larkin cleared his throat. "I reckon she'd say yes if you asked. Not like she's got another choice. Better a wife than a kitchen drudge, if you ask me." Thomas thanked him curtly, gathered his supplies, and left with his thoughts heavy. The image of Clara rose again, her kindness, her strength. Would marrying a girl with no freedom dishonor her memory? Or was saving the land, their land, the only way to honor it? The boarding-house smelled of boiling stew and fresh bread when Thomas pushed through its swinging door. Inside, travelers crowded the tables, clinking mugs and calling for more ale. Behind the counter, a thin young woman moved quickly, ladling soup into bowls, her dark hair tied back in a ragged kerchief. She couldn't have been more than 20. "Ellie!" barked the mistress of the house, a stout woman with arms like ham hocks. "Hurry it along, girl, or I'll dock your supper." "Yes, ma'am," the girl replied softly, her voice carrying a tired lilt. She passed another bowl to a waiting hand, shoulders hunched as though she expected a blow. Thomas watched her for a long moment. She was not striking in the way town belles were, but there was a quiet sturdiness about her, the way she moved despite the scolding, the patience in her eyes as she endured. A life bent but not broken. When the crowd thinned, Thomas stepped forward. "You, Ellie?" She startled, nearly dropping her ladle. "Yes, sir. Can I help you? I need a word. Outside." Her gaze flicked nervously to the mistress, who scowled. "Go on, girl. But don't linger." Out in the crisp air, Ellie wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, wary eyes studying him. "What's this about, mister?" "Hale." Thomas Hale. He shifted his hat. I own the ranch west of town. She nodded slowly. I've heard of it. He cleared his throat, the words tasting foreign even as he forced them out. I need a wife. Her lips parted, shock flashing across her face. A wife. Not for love, he added quickly. For the land. Without a wife, I lose it. I was told you've no ties. Her eyes darkened. Because folks say I'm property. Thomas didn't answer. The truth of it hung between them. Ellie hugged her arms, glancing back toward the boarding-house door. You want me to marry you? Just like that? I won't lie to you. It'd be quick. Legal. You'd have food, a roof, a name. Better than what you've got here. Her chin lifted slightly, defiance sparking through the weariness. And what would you expect of me? A home. Meals. Company. His gaze softened. Respect. That much I can promise. Ellie studied him, searching his weather-lined face for cruelty. She found only a man worn down, desperate but not unkind. Still, her heart thudded in her chest. Marriage, to a stranger. Yet wasn't she already bound to a life she hadn't chosen? At least this way, she might gain something of her own. At last she whispered, I'll do it. The church bell tolled dull and heavy as Reverend Cole read the vows. The ceremony was swift, witnessed only by Larkin and the boarding-house mistress, who looked displeased at losing her kitchen girl. Ellie stood stiff in a borrowed dress, hands trembling as Thomas slipped the plain ring onto her finger. She repeated the words in a quiet voice, her gaze never quite meeting his. When the Reverend declared them husband and wife, silence lingered. No kiss followed. Thomas only nodded, thanking the Reverend before leading Ellie outside. The townsfolk who'd gathered whispered behind their hands. Some sneered, others stared with pity. The proud Hale rancher, reduced to wedding the cook girl branded as property. Thomas ignored them, mounting his horse and helping Ellie up behind him. The ride back was long, the prairie stretching wide and empty around them. Ellie's arms circled his waist lightly, uncertain. Thomas felt the awkwardness keenly but said nothing. What words could bridge such a gulf between strangers bound by necessity? At last, the ranch house came into view, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Ellie's breath caught. To her, it was a castle compared to the cramped kitchen she had known. Yet its silence pressed heavy, the absence of a woman's touch clear in every shadow. Thomas dismounted, helping her down. It's yours now, he said quietly. Our home. She nodded, eyes wide, heart pounding. For the first time, she belonged somewhere. Yet fear twined with hope, fear of what this new life might demand, and hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could become more than property here. Thomas watched her step hesitantly inside, her figure small against the vast doorway. He wondered if he had just saved his land, or opened a door to something far more dangerous to his lonely heart. From property to partner. The first weeks on the Hale ranch passed in uneasy silence. Ellie rose at dawn, just as she had in the boarding-house, moving through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She baked bread, boiled coffee, and set meals on the heavy oak table without a word. Thomas, already dressed for the day's work, would eat quickly, his thanks little more than a grunt. Then he'd disappear into the fields, leaving her alone in the big, echoing house. The place felt less like a home and more like a shrine. Dust motes floated in the shafts of morning light, settling on shelves still lined with Clara's china, the lace curtain she had sewn, the faint scent of lavender clinging stubbornly in the bedroom down the hall. Ellie didn't dare touch any of it. At night, they sat across from each other by lamplight, the silence thick enough to choke. When Thomas finally spoke, it was of cattle counts, fence lines, and weather, never of feelings, never of the woman buried on the hill. Ellie lay awake in the spare room, listening to the coyotes call across the plains, wondering if she'd simply traded one cage for another. It was the barn that changed things. One evening, after Thomas had spent the day breaking a stubborn horse, Ellie wandered out with a pitcher of water. She found him slumped on a hay bale, shirt clinging to his sweat-soaked back. His breath came ragged, his hands raw from the reins. "You'll kill yourself working that way," she said before she could stop herself. Thomas looked up, startled. Her voice, usually quiet, carried a firmness he hadn't heard before. He accepted the water, draining it in long gulps. Then, after a pause, he handed her the cup back. "Thank you." Their eyes met for the first time without barrier, his tired, hers steady. Something shifted, small but undeniable. From then on, Ellie began joining him outside. She fed chickens, learned to mend saddle straps, even tried her hand at milking, laughing when the cow's tail swatted her across the cheek. Thomas, though still reserved, found himself teaching her, explaining the rhythms of ranch life. She listened intently, soaking up knowledge like dry earth taking rain. In turn, she brought warmth back into the house. She scrubbed the floors, mended curtains, and replaced silence with humming as she worked. Slowly, Clara's ghost ceased to haunt every corner. But not everyone welcomed the change. One afternoon, while Thomas was away at market, Ellie ventured into town alone for flour. As she stepped into the general store, conversations hushed. Women drew their children close. Men looked her over with mocking smirks. "Look there," one voice murmured. "The cook girl who thought she could be a rancher's wife." "Property in a wedding dress," another snickered. Ellie kept her chin high, but her cheeks burned. She gathered her sack of flour quickly, only to have a rough hand block her path. Clara's brother, Roy Barlow, loomed before her, his eyes gleaming with malice. "So you're the one Thomas dragged in to keep the ranch," he sneered. "I reckon he's desperate, marrying cast-off kitchen scraps." Ellie's heart pounded, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Excuse me." Roy leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Don't think this changes a thing. That land's mine by rights. When Thomas fails, and he will, you'll be back scrubbing pots, girl." Ellie slipped past him without another word, clutching the flour tight. Her legs shook all the way home, but pride kept her from crying until she reached the empty kitchen. When Thomas returned that evening, he found her wiping her eyes with her apron. At first she tried to hide it, but he caught her wrist gently. "Ellie, what happened?" She told him, haltingly, about the whispers, the insults, Roy's words. Thomas's face darkened, his jaw tightening with a fury she had not seen before. "He had no right," he growled. "No one does." "I'm used to it," she whispered. "People never saw me as more than—" "You're not property," he cut in sharply. His hand lingered on hers, rough and warm. "You're my wife, and they'll learn it." The conviction in his voice cracked something open in her. For the first time, she believed him. Summer ripened into harvest, and with it came long days of labor side by side. Ellie carried water to the fields, her skirts dust-stained, her hair escaping its pins. Thomas, watching her laughter as she scattered feed to the hens, felt a warmth stirring he thought long buried with Clara. One evening, after supper, Ellie lingered at the table, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere," she admitted softly. "I always thought I'd die in someone else's kitchen. But here," she glanced up at him, "this feels different." Thomas's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell her that she had already begun stitching herself into the fabric of his life, but words failed him. Instead, he reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Her lips parted in a shy smile. For once, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was full, brimming with something unnamed. The turning point came with the fire. One dry September night, sparks from a lightning strike set the north pasture ablaze. Thomas woke to the acrid smell of smoke, shouting for Ellie as he pulled on his boots. Together they ran into the night, the sky glowing red as flames raced through the grass. "Get the herd," he barked, mounting his horse. Ellie didn't hesitate. She grabbed a lantern and sprinted toward the corrals, flinging gates wide, shouting and waving until the terrified cattle stampeded toward safety. Smoke stung her eyes, flames licked closer, but she held her ground until the last animal was clear. When Thomas reached her, coughing and soot-streaked, he grabbed her shoulders. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she shot back, breathless. "But we did it." He stared at her, something fierce and unspoken blazing between them. Then, before he could think better, he pulled her into his arms. She melted against him, the world burning and yet standing still in that moment. When the fire was finally beaten back and dawn broke smoky and gray, they sat side by side on the porch steps, exhausted. Thomas turned to her, his voice rough. "Ellie, I married you to save my land. But I'd keep you, even if I lost every acre." Her breath caught, tears shining in her ash-smudged eyes. "And I'd stay, even if you had nothing." Their lips met then, hesitant at first, then certain, sealing a vow far deeper than the one spoken before the Reverend. The months that followed wove them together in ways neither had imagined. Where once there was silence, there was laughter. Where once there were ghosts, there was life. Neighbors who had whispered began to see the truth. The cook girl had become the heart of the Hale ranch, not by birthright but by grit, love, and loyalty. Even Roy Barlow, bitter as ever, could not deny the sight of Thomas and Ellie riding the range side by side, equals in every way that mattered. "It's not just mine anymore," he said softly, resting his chin against her hair. "It's ours." Ellie smiled, leaning into him, no longer a girl branded as property but a woman claimed by love and by choice. And for the widowed rancher who had once thought his heart buried forever, the land was saved, but far more precious was the partner who had saved him.